If you're in middle management, you're at risk of losing your role as the automation kind of comes up from below. If you're a middle manager, I think the best thing you can do right now is start thinking and acting like a player coach instead of just a coach. Roll your sleeves back up and get back down into the work.
Today, as part of your operating model, you document your processes end to end. Then many an organization that has hundreds of pages of process documentation. In an AI agentic world, my assumption is that process is going to matter much less, and the focus is going to shift more towards the outcome.
Welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement. We're super excited to be back with you today. Last week, we were talking about OpenClaw agents and how agents are going to change the future, rule the world, and all the other dystopian crazy thoughts that you're having around procurement agents these days. It's coming. Very exciting. It's not as dystopian as you might think. It's going to be very empowering. We came out of that conversation going, oh my gosh, what are the implications to the operating model of procurement? How are things going to look different? And there are a lot of questions. I suspect today there's probably more questions than there are answers. But in order to get into that the best we can, of course, we have Zach, our genius from London, constantly working AI automation and consulting with the best companies around the world. And Tomas joins us as well, a great guest to have in this conversation. I met Tomas when he was the head of procurement at Juniper Networks. He's worked with them for many years now and has a deep, rich history of contributing to procurement long before that. So Tomas, welcome to Proc-N-Roll. It's awesome to have you.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, and very excited to join this discussion.
Yeah, we're gonna have a really good conversation here. So, Zach, I know you're the king of operating models, right? You have models of these things because you go in with customers all the time talking about this. But I walked away from the last conversation and I was like, do I really understand what an operating model really is? Like, what does this entail? So I started down a reminding/learning process about the scope of this. And I don't know if you agree with this, Zach. I'd like to jump from this kind of into the operating model that you think about. But what this should be is sort of the blueprint of procurement, all of everything that's going on in procurement. So this should touch on the structure, the process, how are you doing source to pay? How are you doing source to contract? What does the tech stack look like, that digital backbone? And then, of course, there's the talent and the team that comes into play here as well. So you've got so many facets of what goes on in procurement. There's almost too much happening here to bundle it into one episode. I'm sure this is going to turn into a summary episode and then 4 more episodes to kind of dive in to the details here. But when you sit down with a customer, Zach, a client, how do you start talking about the operating model?
It's very simply, operating model for me is about how you deliver the value, right? So you have operating model across any business function. For procurement, it's about how does procurement as a function deliver value? So how, like the how part of it, not the why, but the how. And so there are many different ways to think about it. Most commonly, the one that we use in my firm is 6 layers, which I think is people, process, technology, service delivery, as in how you set up to serve across everything, governance, and then things like performance and analytics and stuff like that. But you can have a much smaller operating model of just like 3 or 4 layers if you want to think of it that way. People, process, technology, maybe one more on governance, right? So it doesn't matter, like the number of layers is just layers of abstraction and layers of complexity that you want to add to describe how you're going to deliver value. But that's all it is. It's just saying, what are the processes? What are the people and the skills and the roles that we need to actually execute those processes? What's the underlying technology stack that's going to host and drive those processes? And then on top of that, how do we have good governance? How do we handle data, et cetera, et cetera? That'd be my definition.
Oh, so world hunger, the full architecture, it is the blueprint after all.
It is the blueprint, absolutely. That's the blueprint of how you deliver value.
Yeah. Tomas, when you're kind of, in fact, let's take a moment. Why don't you just take, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes and tell us about your background? Where were you before Juniper? Kind of, what are the kinds of things you were looking at? I know you've been deep into these same concepts, in previous lives and roles as well.
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. So, well, you can hear by my accent that originally come from Europe. I came in the US long time ago. So I think I bring this European / American view, which is a little bit different. The other thing that I bring is that I have been in different industries. I have been in the specialty chemical industry, flavor fragrance, consumer goods, telecom, and then latest in the technology industry. And of course, it's the traditional procurement management on the direct side or indirect side. Nevertheless, companies always want to do something when there's a disruption. There's a merger, an acquisition, a spin on new business units. Something happens, and then procurement gets the attention from the C-suite in general, right? The thing that I would like to say quickly here is that very traditional procurement organizations have always been for many years, and many still are, is about category management and savings, right? To get my costs down and save. The issue with that is that organizations perceive procurement very often as complicated, highly technical, not really understand what's happening. And sadly, many salespeople will say, avoid procurement because they would just give you tough terms and conditions and get your cost down. And the stakeholder will say, avoid procurement also because, I am the deal maker and I will make it happen for you. So my whole big hope, and we see it happening already, right? With the new technologies come to play and the different type of technologies. I'm not going into those details. I think Zach is much more qualified than I am. But is that procurement is really becoming and seen as a business solution with suppliers. And as simple as to put it is to say, you have a budget stakeholder, let's work together and make it happen quick and fast. And you get a solution for the money that you have available. And ultimately, that should be our inspiration.
Simplification
And fast and quick, while at the same time, right, Conrad, as you know, you're very well placed for that, is that the compliance and policies need to be there. And many industries, you take the health industry, you take the imaging industry, you have in many industries where the quality, labor laws, technology, and now with Gen AI, you want to do business with the right suppliers, not just with any suppliers who come with a good price and a good solution. So it's part of our journey. We need to find a way to make it, as fast as possible, as business-like as possible, right?
So that's really interesting. I think what Tomas said, it resonates a lot with me because I described operating models about how you deliver value. And exactly what Tomas was saying is value used to be savings, but now it's really expanded. Now value is about minimizing risk. Value is also about speed, like Tomas was saying, and customer, throughput and satisfaction. Is that how you're seeing, Tomas, that the actual value procurement delivers changes? Hence, the operating model needs to change to keep up with that.
But what I see really happening is that a few years back, it was the strategic buyer was doing it all, right? You pull out a contract somewhere from your standard database, and then you look into your purchase orders, you negotiate an agreement, and then somehow you even approve the agreement and you approve the purchase order, etc. So this is a concept of procurement does it all. I think with the sophistication as we have seen in the last years, is that the operating per se is kind of moving into more and more organization move it into a shared service with accounts payable, accounts receivable, customer service, logistics, and so on. And you can see that from I think, Con, you were talking about skill sets, there's a whole new type of skill set happening when you go into the operational per se with technical background, understanding how an AI agent works, how an RPA works, how maybe be a little bit more closer to data scientists and so on, and you really streamline that. On the other side, you have the strategic sourcing side. And the strategic sourcing side, I think, is to create an environment where you truly understand what the staker wants. And I think it starts very often with how much time can we spend first on the requester level, right? I mean, that's how you have certain organizations talking about orchestration and intakes and all that. But beyond that, really understand what they need and not certain application go cross organization or cross business units and functions. So you cannot always talk to one person, right? And I think that's really, and I think Conrad, you said that in other podcast or what I read, is that it's not anymore about centralization and decentralization. It's really about engagement with the stakeholder, truly understand. And I think just the last point, and then I'll let you guys speak, is that it's not as simple anymore. I'm saying, I know what you need, let me make a contract, and then I'm out. I think what's happening here is that you need also to understand how is this contract really used? What is the usage consumption of that contract? How many licenses or consulting hours have been really used? So when you go into this renegotiation game, you have a much broader information available. And the last point is that it's not just putting a contract together, but it's also to understand what documents were last updated when that supplier was created. I mean, are we still in line with what we are supposed to do? So I think it gets much broader, much faster, and much more interesting.
Yeah, I'm a couple of things that you said really jump out at me, right? The generally the shift in the operating models can be driven by something that's happening inside to the business, within the business, or let's say just in some aspect of technology. Like in this case, we have so much happening from an AI and agentic perspective. Like, how is this going to impact the tech stack, the technology, the process, how we're working with people? Like this becomes really important consideration. So, but it's also this, I don't know, the pendulum between centralized and decentralized service model to our stakeholders, right? I joined in the business world in the mid 90s, and there was already the beginnings, or shortly after I arrived, the beginnings of the transition away from centralized functional support. Like when I got to Intel, there was a travel department that had travel agents, and you would call them and they would book your travel for you, right? And then the internet and the intranet and internet and all the technology that kind of happened in the late 90s into the early 2000s made it so that was decentralized. Now you book your own travel, you take care of yourself, it's yours now. So that function kind of almost completely decentralized. The central team is now building relationships with hotels and airlines and trying to establish those discounts and those final prices. But we look at the same kind of a push to self-service from a procurement perspective, right? Where we keep saying, well, we're going to put this inside of Coupa or Ariba or Zip or any of these tools, and you take care of it yourself. We're not really here to do it for you. You're on your own, and we're going to simplify it for you, which I would argue there's been a tremendous lack of true simplification. But what's happened is we've taken procurement people that probably cost a half or a third as much per year as the engineers, the scientists, the marketing professionals, all these other people, and we kind of push that work over on their side in order to argue, a smaller budget consumption and cost savings on our side. So, I think what we're starting to see now in this agentic world is technology that allows the transition away from self-service back to there's now the ability for an expert to help everyone. There used to be a travel expert to help me. There used to be a procurement expert to help me. I'm so often left figuring it out by myself. And now there's this new technology that kind of comes back and says, hey, every person in the enterprise can have an expert on their shoulder to guide them through what is traditionally a very complicated process. So the disruption I see is this real. I mean, this is real, folks, right? Last week we looked at OpenClaw and how quickly and easy it is to create these agents to drive this kind of automation back into this space. So now we have a big driver. It's pretty significant, right? It has the potential of impacting the centralized, decentralized, the org chart, the tech stack in a massive way, the process, all of these things are now back on the table. How does this start? How do you sort through this, right? And look into the future and say, this is the operating model. Thomas, you started talking about skills. What skills do we need on the team? All of that's up in the air now. So if you're a procurement leader out there looking at this change, what now? Like, how do I think about this? And how do I, because I think, Zach, the biggest risk is like deer in the headlights. I don't know what to do. I can't do anything. I'm just going to sit and watch and wait. What should I be doing as a leader in this, with my operating model in the face of this scope of change?
I'd be really interested to hear, Tomas, your view. I just very quickly, for me, I just want to say, for me, procurement's a support function, right? And so if you have agents that can do procurement, then, us as people, our value kind of erodes quite a bit, because the engineer, the marketer, the salesperson, they're the real stars of the show, right? They're the people who are driving innovation, driving sales, driving operations. And so agents can now help drive a lot of that and just work alongside them, right? And so I think it has a fundamental impact. I do have some thoughts on how it's going to impact the operating model. But Tomas, you got any views on that?
Yeah, I think that building on what Conrad just said is that organization will have to learn to step back a little bit and prepare in advance, because everything is possible in today's world, right? But I think, for example, if you have complicated business process, it's not just within procurement. It crosses into the stakeholders. It crosses into subject matter experts like the legal, the cybersecurity, the technical accounting, etc. And now you have to use new ways. I mean, it's not really new, but it's not, it may be a little bit new to procurement. Is really pay attention with maybe a process mining approach, or a task mining, or intelligent process identification where the problem resides, or on the data, right? I mean, everybody speaks about dirty and clean data, but I think, Conrad, you had a lot of ideas on that, is to say, well, start with the right data, right? Make cleaning and not knowing why they're not even correct. So I think there's a learning in terms of organization, and probably momentarily resources to make available. Better prepare on the existing process, how to streamline, get some kind of data in place, and start small, I would say, right? Don't go all over. And then really define where the business is. Because I do believe that we spoke a lot about value at the beginning, is that it's not just a cost center to get costs down. I think there are many situations where you bring suppliers in to really bring a business revenue value also. You have a lot of industries where you buy services, and those services is really go to market, right? Many companies, they cannot produce and develop everything they need to go to market. Very often they need to buy complementary services in order to satisfy the package that gets proposed as a sales quote. And so you will see new dimensions, but for that, it's important that procurement reinvent themselves and understands the business case, right?
Here's how I see some of that reinvention in the world of AI. Okay, so how does procurement actually reinvent? So let's look about some of the different layers that we've got. Okay, take processes, right? Today, as part of your operating model, you document your processes end to end. And I've been many an organization that has hundreds of pages of process documentation. In an AI agentic world, my assumption is that actually process is going to matter much less, and the focus is going to shift more towards the outcome. So actually just look straight towards the value. Don't look at how as much as like where, like go get the value. Because if you think about the hundreds of process maps today, many businesses I see, they don't actually execute the process step by step exactly as it's been documented. There is an element of reasoning and judgment, and things are, in our world, life is complicated. You can't document every exception case, every edge case, every little thing that you need to do. So actually, when people are executing these processes, there are clear gates and clear flows, but there's an element of like a human just needs to get to the end of this, and agents can do the same kind of thing. So the process becomes less important. It becomes about the outcome. And then I think procedures is where processes evolve to. And something a little bit higher level that the agent needs to follow, rules it needs to comply with, policies it needs to adhere to. but otherwise just help me get this thing that I need as soon as possible, right? That's one layer of the operating model. Another one that might change with AI is people, right? So, and specifically, I'm going to talk about the jobs and skills. Now, this will be a slow shift that happens over time, but today, someone's job is to redline contracts. Someone else's job is to generate RFP documents, Someone else's job is to do market research. Someone's job is to run a sourcing event. Agents are going to be able to do all of these things, right? Because they're quite administrative. It's about generating things, and we know generative AI is great at generating things. And so what happens to the person's role? Well, in the medium term, you're not going to be generating RFPs anymore, but you are going to be reviewing the RFPs that the agent generates, right? And you're going to be checking with almost a technical mindset to say, has the agent done a good job here? Yes or no, right? And part of the whole framework and how you deliver value in the operating model of the future is your feedback to that agent goes back into the pipeline. So the agent gets better and better over time for your business, right? And my example is, by the time an agent has generated 500 RFPs and humans have reviewed 500 of that agent's RFPs, are they going to review the 501st RFP, right? Or is the RFP just going to be at a great standard and people are just going to trust the agent at that point? Be like, this is a skilled agent, it's done a good job. I'm not going to review in detail what it's doing anymore. But in the meantime, that skill set of evaluation, and review, I think that becomes really critically important in terms of what people's roles will be. Plus, I think people's role will evolve to something that's more strategic. So it's about, the agent can do stuff, but you need to guide the agent. You need to teach it how to think, how to act, how to behave, what good looks like. That's what your role becomes. You know all this stuff as the human. You need to teach the agent all those things. And you need to be thinking ahead how you're going to improve in the future. So that continuous improvement and how you're going to make the most of the capabilities in AI as they get better, etc. You need to keep up with that. So fundamentally, it's a different kind of
sorry,
role.
let me just jump in here, because I think you're describing a participant in the procurement organization that we know today, right? You're not talking about the CPO, and you're saying these people are today's workers, are the people you're describing.
Yeah. I mean, it starts there, but certainly agents can creep into strategic.
So, but you're saying you're going to need to teach them. You're going to be able to supervise them. You're going to check their work. Like, what I'm hearing you describe is the common worker in procurement, like all of us, like at whatever level, but all the way down to the bottom, is now going to be expected to lead and manage, do those kinds of things that traditionally would have said, oh, you're the manager of sourcing, so it's your job to make sure those RFPs look good, right? That the process is followed and the outcome is achieved. And there was a manager above, the human agents that were doing this work before. Now you're saying there's going to be this automated agent. So the people that remain, so if, maybe tell me if you think this is a practical tip, but if you're going to have a position in the future, you've got to figure out how to be an effective manager / leader, not just a worker, right? Because the worker of the future is now managing agents and automation and overseeing work and checking quality in a way that traditionally managers and leaders of the past have kind of done that role.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
But Zach, you're saying also is that kind of interesting, is that the human being needs to accept to teach a machine, right? Which is not very natural, right? Let's say, right? So that's a shift in the mental, I would say. The other thing is that probably in the hierarchy, Conrad, that what you're referring to, the middle layer, let's say an organization has 3 levels. The second level might step by step disappear, when the middle might maybe go out and the lower level might go up, and then there's an educational and an exposure to say, well, can a human do that, or can an AI / machine do it? And if yes, how do I get there? Now, the reality is that many organizations are not totally ready, right? So I think that there is procurement has always done an important educational aspect to it, educating upwards, I would say, the C-suite, also educating stakeholders, maybe even suppliers, right? How do we want to do business? And then as the technology evolves, is to insert it and guide. But that requires also a new set of skill sets, because that means that any strategic buyer at certain level is not just recruited to do negotiations, let's say, or firefight anything that happens in the compliance world or other areas, but it also needs to be available to understand the minimum and then guide it through so that the organization its own can evolve. Right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Thomas, because AI isn't, so agents is one thing, but AI in and of itself, I think, permeates everything. I'll give you an example. If I'm a sourcing manager today, I think my job in the future, you're right, it's going to take time, but my job is going to be to review agents, sourcing agents that actually generate RFPs and do things like that, right? That's going to be my role. But equally, I need to stay ahead of the game. Because if you're because I can get value today as a sourcing manager just by chatting with AI, right? I can learn so much just by working with an AI. So the AI isn't just something that I'm managing. It's also something that's helping educate me, helping do research for me, helping train me. But it's different use cases. On the one hand, I'm building an agent that can execute a task and a process and do things like that. On the other hand, I'm using AI to stay ahead, right? And to be better. So it's almost like where the AI fits in the picture, it's everywhere, right? It's not just that you got to build agents, but it's also that you got to use AI in your job to get better. And also remember, the more you use AI, the more you understand the limitations and the issues and how AI really works. There's a thing about this which I've noticed is you don't really get that unless you have several hundred hours of like working with AI. You start to, notice like how AI actually works and where it doesn't work. And it's very hard to articulate that, right? Because it's very complicated. But that experience that people will get over time by working more with AI is exactly the kind of thing that's going to help them build their agents and become better at their job at the same time. All right.
Yeah.
I've got to jump back to something Thomas said, because I think it was a really, really great nugget. If you're in middle management, you're at risk of losing your role, your job as the automation kind of comes up from below. And I think that's probably driven by this question of, are you the subject matter expert at the work anymore? Are you just, the team and, the high level outcomes and things like that? Because the agent management that we're talking about, Zach and Thomas, I think requires that deeper understanding to do the training and the refinement of what's going on inside the automation. So if you're a middle manager, I think the best thing you can do right now is start thinking and acting like a player coach instead of just a coach. Like, roll your sleeves back up and get back down into the work, because that will, if you're just naturally already, or you can get yourself in a place where you can refamiliarize yourself with being the subject matter expert and the coach, then you're in a really great position to do what we're talking about in terms of leading this automation. Otherwise, you kind of get moved aside because you need the subject matter expert deeply involved with this building out of the agents, testing the agents, improving the agents, and ultimately then learning the skill to manage the agent over time. Yes, no? Does that make sense to everybody?
Really well said.
Yes, it makes
Perfect.
sense. But it real question, I think many corporations manage employees by level, right? You are level 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11. That means that you're a VP, you get that level. You're a director, you get that level. You're a senior manager, you have that level. And then do you supervise people? You have the senior manager and so on. I think HR has a big role to play to break that down, because it's not so much at what level you are, is that what are the technical skills and influence that you have, which is a completely different criteria, right? So I don't think there's anything wrong to be below the VP or director level and still grow your salary because you just acquire new skills that didn't exist and flips the organization over. I think the traditional level people management and it's almost like impossible in many organizations if you don't manage people, so to say. You can't go up, right? Which makes no sense to me.
We actually added 3 agents to our org chart last month when we presented it out to the team. So it is this. I mean, historically, it's like, do you have an individual contributor career path, like you're talking about, Thomas, that doesn't hold you out of making more money and having, more visibility and influence in the organization as an individual contributor, is that path already exists. If not, HR needs to start thinking about that, because these individual contributors are actually managing so much automation, so much more automation. And even, these are agents, they're not people, but they're doing what traditionally people have done in the past, and they're going to need to be managed and understood and improved and, frankly, fired. Like, some agents are just going to go rogue and you're going to have to shut them down. You're going to have to bring in another one. New technologies are going to come in, right? Like, all sorts of things will happen. That person as an individual contributor will have huge leverage in the organization. So yeah, it's really exciting times.
So Zach, you were saying something I thought, just want to build quickly on that. On one hand, the operation is easier, and on the other hand, I call it get visibility, right? So we always speak about RFPs and so on, but the top strategic suppliers, what is probably, depending on organization and industries, but it's probably in the easy 30-40% of the spend, there is not much RFP really going on, right? Because you have established suppliers. Those suppliers have been there for 10 years. They contribute in a very solid way. The deepness, the classic will be HR systems, ERPs, sales ops, and all that, right? So nobody's really getting to touch it for some cost savings purposes, right? But having a higher visibility, how to manage that supplier. And I think that in the procurement role, there's one element missing, and Conrad, I would be interested in your views on that. Over the last 2 years, let's say, I see still a big struggle of getting market information in order for negotiators to do the right job. I'm not talking about information because somebody has the experience of a given market and then somehow that person has developed their own criteria. But how do you really have a precise information in order to deal with negotiations with big suppliers, and at the same time be compliant with the IT infrastructure, allowing external information to come in? And I think from the procurement side, it feels like this is still a blocking factor. But I want to see your opinion on that, Conrad.
It's interesting because there was a prediction in our episode, a couple of months ago about the procurement organizations would get. It's funny. It was almost like Natasha's 3 predictions were made before all this OpenClaw agentic kind of reawakening, at least in my brain. But the organization will get smaller and gig workers will become a bigger part of what we do, which would theoretically say something like, hey, Tomas, you're an expert in mobile phone services, negotiations, and management, and I only need to do that in a big way once every 2 or 3 years. I'm going to bring you in. You're going to bring that kind of expertise to the table. So, the question of, do we bring in sort of a gig human into that equation to bring all of that experience into a category, a negotiation, whatever it might be? And how much of traditionally what we've tried to do with market intelligence and other aspects are covered by the research? We've seen over the last couple of years the ability of the last generation of sort of generative AI to do that research and bring it to us. And it went from simple chat that hallucinated a lot to deep research that could generate a 50-page analysis of a category, a market, a company, in minutes, maybe 15 minutes, maybe a half hour if it was super complicated, but you would have paid tens of thousands of dollars and spent weeks and weeks and weeks trying to amass that intelligence. So I don't know, Tomas, whether it's missing or it's, where it will be missing, where the data and the market intelligence gaps are going to be, such that AI won't be able to fill it, and where you'll kind of come in with the gig human instead of the agent to fill that knowledge gap. I don't know, Zach, what's your...
Yeah, just one more comment and let Zach speak, is that the blocking point, I think, is that I have seen organizations who provide what I call supplier market intelligence. In general, is very broad, right? It's a big trend, which is it's okay, right? But not very precise to do a negotiation. Now, then you have a second segment where you have certain technology suppliers coming in and say, yes, I know how the market is behaving, because I have collected information from other customers and I have how you call that, anonymized the data. And if you buy my subscription, I give you more information. But it feels not really completely safe, right? Because those suppliers have NDAs, they have confidentiality agreements. Now you release your information. Will you really release your information in a high-tech organization or in a very innovative industry? Not really, right? So anyhow, so Zach, I will be interested in your comments, but I feel like the internal aspect of a corporation can be fixed in one way or the other. But when the information comes from the outside, in order really to make savvy, market-driven decisions, that aspect, I'm not convinced yet that it's in place for many reasons: regulatory, audit, law, or simply not ready.
Well, I think AI is like these model providers have really done procurement and everyone a huge service, because if you think about what they actually are, they've just been trained on tons of external data already. Like, I can use a model that's 6 months old today and ask it, like, what are the best suppliers in this particular category? And it can give me a better list, and it will be way faster than what I had to do in the past, which is go on Google and do some searching and then try and figure out who the best are. I can ask follow-up questions. I get to some answers much quicker, right? But I want to say, for me, the biggest thing that AI will change, let's take negotiations, for example. It's not that, well, a lot of procurement organizations don't do great negotiations today. What AI is going to enable is for you to do more negotiations faster, but also much more intelligently, right? I used the agent recently where I forgot what the buy was, but I remember creating an agent that can do TCO, right? And I said that your job as the agent is to break down for me for a particular product or service, what are the components of that, and how do I actually understand the cost breakout of that particular product or service, right? And I created it in such a way that I can tell it almost any product or service, and it would reason and it would give me all the insights around the different components of that. Now, that for me is, as you know, my own personal experience, I didn't know any of this stuff around creating TCO models, but this agent can do it. And then I'm just reviewing and I'm kind of sense checking, like, yeah, what the agent's saying makes sense. But like, that's such a powerful example. For example, like you want to do a negotiation. In the past, TCO would have taken you several weeks and you'd only do it for like the really important stuff. Now I can do a TCO in 2 minutes, or maybe a bit more, right? Maybe like an hour, right? So it's come down from like several weeks figuring out how this works to just an hour. An agent can give me a TCO model. So my negotiations become more intelligent. Everything becomes faster. Everything becomes better. It's a real productivity boost. I can do more negotiations. The only other thing to also think about how the future will change, Thomas, in terms of the external data part. There's something that has been in my brain for 3 years, and we're not there yet, but we'll get there, is the volume of data generated by AI and in the future will be really useful. So you look at Coupa, for example. Coupa, I think, have a huge amount of data from their customer transactions and interactions. Yeah. What Coupa haven't done, which I think they should do and will be forthcoming, is they haven't used that data to actually train new models or like not train new models, but either run machine learning basically on that data. Where in the future scenarios, yeah, but then I can also do forecasting and prediction, but with machine learning, right? So it's very mathematically, statistically based, and I can predict the cost of something a year in the future if I have a ton of data.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, that's the big shift and investment and cost that those platforms will happen. But if you move on a little bit, is that the two things that I find interesting here is that you remember, Conrad, a few years back when we were kind of brainstorming. I still see ourselves in Sunnyvale kind of brainstorming, right? And why don't we have some kind of? I mean, let me rephrase that. Do we foresee that eventually a certain type of platforms will come into play where we don't have to onboard every single supplier every time, right? Where there are standard contracts, I would just pull out, and if you're part of that network, I don't need to reuse it. The problem is that, yes, AI agent can do a lot, but with the industry, when I say the procurement industry, is still suffering of the fact that you have 1,000 suppliers, you might get 900 T&C standards. You have 1,000 suppliers, you might get 900 different types of onboarding. So the dream case would be that a certain type of industries, they regroup and then standardize that, and that you combine that with all your talent, Zach, on the AI side, the LLM side, and so on. But you don't question necessarily every time the fundamental of the liability clauses of this and that of every single organization, because it's such a waste of time. And I'm not really sure. I mean, I have seen organizations, large organizations, spending 6 months of code of conduct. They just did not agree of code of conduct, and they were multinational corporations. So, and it still exists, right?
Yeah. Well, I you both of you know what I do for a living, right? Inside of Graphite, we're focused on creating a network and a community. And, I think of some of these principles in the future when to be a part of the community, you kind of just sign up to some baselines like you're talking about. It blows my mind that we're all still sending NDAs around every time we want to talk to anybody. And you read the NDAs and everyone's like, yeah, this one looks just like mine, move it around, sign it, move a few clauses, argue about the number of years, maybe a few weird things that some attorney snuck in that just shouldn't be there. But when you're in the community, a little bit like Amazon, right? You go to Amazon and you buy something. There is an expectation. It's not always true, by the way. I mean, I've discovered that not everything is returnable on Amazon, but there's an expectation that I can buy it. If it's crap, I can return it. It's just a baseline that if, and the same is true for some high-end retail and other, Costco here in the US. You buy something you don't like, you take it back. You can even take your laptop back, up to I don't know what it is, 8 weeks or 10 weeks, 12 weeks into the future, you just take your laptop back, say, yeah, this isn't working for me. They take it and you're done. There's sort of a baseline expectation of behavior in the community that I think I really do foresee a future where NDAs can go away, where basic principles of participation like liability and code of conduct and all these other things, if you're going to play, you got to play nice. Otherwise you're out of the community. Right. And so I do see that kind of stuff evolving. I think it's going to take a little bit longer to get there, but there will be a forcing function, right? I mean, if you think about the AI, the speed of negotiation and the movement to standard from an agentic perspective is going to be pretty powerful, right? Because it's like humans get in a room and, hey, I need a taller chair than you, and I need light behind me so that you get intimidated and all this other random stuff. And frankly, it's going to create sort of market pricing for things as complicated legal services and, marketing services. And these are all one-offs and they're all unique, but it will start to really push towards a market price for how things are put together. Because, Zach, you're talking about TCO, that's going to enable should cost analysis. And once you put the should cost analysis on the table with real data, we're not arguing anymore about, okay, personality and negotiation style and skill. It's this is the profit margin that you are entitled to. This is the overhead that you're entitled to. And this is the market rate for these roles, right? I mean, it almost can boil down to something like that.
But that's assuming perfect data, Conrad, right? And
I'm not talking next week. I'm not talking next week. I'm talking at some point in the future.
So data is currency, right? And the question is, will we ever get to that point where literally, I think everyone's wondering, agents just do stuff and data is perfect information everywhere, and agents just do stuff, and then humans, just kick their legs up on their desk and call it a day, won't do anything. I don't think so. I think the data that's generated becomes really valuable. Data becomes currency. Data becomes the new oil, as they say, and you're going to have access to data, and some of it will be better quality than other data. You'll be also generating a lot of data yourself as an organization. That's going to be your own proprietary data. You're not going to want to give that to, your competitors or stuff like that. So your TCO models might be the best around, right? Because you've invested the time in your operating model to capture all that information, all that value, and then generate more value off the back of it. I think that's staying. I don't think that's going to disappear.
Yeah, just to build on this, what you just said, Conrad, is that I think fundamentally people want to do business and stay safe, right? Especially with everything happening in the world. You want to do business, recruit thousands of people on the temp labor market, because you do installation for the telecom, for example. Well, you want to have everybody coming in, train, and respect the law, and there are many examples. I think every company is a little bit different, but as the technologies evolve, right, all your areas act, the LLM, the AI agents, and so on, there is a moment where the internal data and the external data will cross more and more. And I think for the moment, there is a certain level of discomfort, let's call it from the CIO office perspective, what is safe to come in and what's not so safe to come out, right? And if we had, let us dream just 2 minutes, right? Well, if we had this type of safe platform or safe environment, that makes it easier, right? Versus being completely exposed and not knowing who can come in, right? I don't know, we haven't spoken about it in a long time, Conrad, but you had this initial idea, I thought it was very creative, working with some kind of insurance organizations, or almost like Stampage. I'm saying, well, if I can buy insurance and I can run my AI from the inside and outside, I can bring companies in and I can create suppliers. I don't need to wait 2 weeks for suppliers. I don't need to negotiate every single TNC. I mean, that will be the dream part. Then, do you see, how do you see that evolving? Because I know you have worked on that.
Yeah, I mean that idea that you were talking about was sort of creating an insurance. We were collaborating in the early days with an insurance expert to create an insurance marketplace inside of Graphite. So when you go, Zach, when you go into site, you're filling out cyber insurance requirements for a new company, and you're finding that your policy's lacking. You could do a quick shopping activity to make sure your insurance is now in compliance with what's needed, at that organization, university, whatever it might be. I still think that that's really interesting, because you can begin in that situation to start managing risk with insurance and transferring the cost of that risk and insurance contractually, instead of, trying to, I don't know, achieve some checklist perfection of, not letting risks through the door, or,
But Conrad, it struck me yesterday, right? It's tax time, right? So I send my taxes to my CPA. The CPA sends me back the invoice. It's okay, you have to pay. I just make it up, $1,000, whatever. And then there's a little line below. It's called error insurance, $90. I said to myself, that's kind of interesting, right? So here's your CPA, totally qualified with a lot of people. They do my little taxes, and then they send me the invoice, and there's an insurance line into it. So I'm saying, why can this not happen in our world, right? Where you add a line of $100 or something, that you have some kind of protection, that at the end you're not totally exposed. And because you have no protection, you build more and more processes inside in order to protect yourself. And more smart people you put in process, more process you get, right? So it feels like it's never ending, right?
It's a great idea, Tom. I'm actually thinking about whether this exists or not, like for agents. I'll tell you why, because I do think, one, agents will get to a point where they're reliable. Like my example of the 500 RFPs, right? Or anything you do. Like in the future, your CPA is an agent, and your agent will file your taxes, right? And insurance companies and most people will get comfortable with like a level of service and expectation that, yeah, it works reliably 99% of the time, 98% of the time. And then there's totally a market, I think, for that 2% where it goes wrong. Right. So that's an example of like a whole new market that emerges.
Yeah, this would be interesting to brainstorm, to be honest. I really think there's something there.
I got to tell you that we've implemented enough automation and agents and new data into our supplier bank fraud. Zach, you and I haven't talked about this, but our supplier bank fraud processes, that we are on the verge of essentially doing what Tomas is saying, and adding a little checkbox to the line item of our relationship that allows them to get a warranty. It's not insurance, right? Because not everyone can sell insurance. It's a highly regulated capability, but a warrant, like extend the warranty in such a way that, if there's a failure that looks like this or that or the other, that, that in our case, Graphite would compensate for that. But as Tomas was talking, I was just thinking how pervasive this is, right? I buy a flight, and at the bottom it's like, hey, do you want travel insurance?
Yes, exactly.
I bought a product. I don't remember what it was that I bought, but it was like, hey, do you want to buy the extended 6-month warranty? Like everywhere I go, there is that little checkbox at the bottom that adds this extra degree of protections. Very, very interesting idea.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
we need to look into it, I think, as an industry. So because
Yeah.
it will
Well,
remove
listen, we're
that
coming
kind of
to
helps
the
with
tail
your
end of our.
CIO question.
Oh, go ahead, Zach. Go.
Well, I was going to say, Thomas, your question about the CIO, like that's a good way to think about it. Like CIOs are, don't trust the data coming in, etc., for how agents use it. I do think that's it's a real problem, and I think your idea with the insurance is a real solve for that. So, yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting. The other thing that was coming to my mind as we were in that conversation is, and I think Europeans may have done a better job protecting their personal data, or they may just be in denial. But the reality is, when I think about, I listen to these podcasts about the amount of technology that's available to listen in and to watch and to harvest data and do all of these things, either for commercial purposes, every time I buy and swipe my credit card or any of those kind of things, just a massive amount of data that exists around me as an entity, as a person, as a family, massive amount of data. And I've just arrived at a place where I'm like, you know what? Like I have no hope of any real true privacy. Anything I do online, anything I say on my phone, anything I text to anybody, anything I put in an email, there's just a basic assumption that it isn't really private, it isn't really encrypted, it isn't really secure. And at a certain point, I wonder how much of what we're, this conversation that we're kind of pretending is protected inside the walls of a business because of everybody letting the LLM and the AI in, it's almost escapable, right? Once you put a hole in the wall, it just starts to flow. I saw a post on LinkedIn yesterday where somebody said, I think it was a procurement post, so many salespeople have uploaded their customer proposals into AI to ask questions about, how does this proposal look? How can I improve it? That you could actually, and I haven't tried this, so I don't know it's true, but you could actually just go out and do sort of what's the typical cost of this thing? And because that thing has been leaked out millions and millions of times, there's actually data sitting inside the models that haven't truly been protected, that's available to just kind of get market price analysis. Folks, I think the future is going to look very, very different than the past. As far as getting down to practical bits and pieces on this, Zach, we have to dive deeper into this operating model. I think we've brushed on the surface of the organization, the talent, the technology, the process, and each of these is worth a 2 or 3 hour episode in itself. Before we call it a wrap, first, Tomas, thank you so much for joining us today. You brought a lot of really interesting insights to the conversation. Getting back to practical from the conversation, each of you, what's your walk away, and what would you say to the procurement leader out there that's faced with this conversation and thinking about their operating model? Zach, I'll start with you. Tomas, give you just another minute to kind of think that through.
Yeah, if I'm a leader today thinking about my operating model of the future, the first caution, let's say, is like, don't assume that just because agents are coming that you need to necessarily shrink that middle layer or any potential layer. Think about how you can do more. Because like we said, operating model is about delivering value. So how do you deliver more value? How do you scale that? And think across those 6 layers or however many layers you want to think about it. Really understand and think about each one individually and how it's going to change in the future. That'd be my 2 cents.
The abundance strategy. Don't be a limited mindset, but an abundance mindset. I love that. And, go ahead, Tomas, you're up next.
No, the short story is that don't be afraid, right? Don't be afraid to surround yourself either with an employee or a contractor or a service to start small in order to show what is possible. Surround yourself with resources, to stay generic, where you start to move the wheel into the next direction, right? And really find a way to communicate. Maybe have an internal marketing person actually with stakeholders and C-suite to say that the world is changing And procurement is now really on the front center with a solution that gets delivered by suppliers. And there's just a new sets of deliverables that can really create business value and ultimately get the stock market up, right? Because everybody wants a share going up, right?
Yeah. No, I love it. Don't lean back, lean forward into this stuff. And, my final comment, I guess I would say the operating model is your blueprint, right? It's your blueprint to value. And either you're the architect or somebody else is going to come in and architect, either just fate and circumstance around you. But leadership right now is all about having the vision and the insight and making the decisions and investments to enable you to be that architect. Can you make the best decisions right now? No way. No way. I mean, you can't predict what things are going to look like 12 or 18 months from now, other than the fact that they will be different. There will be more automation. This agentic stuff is real. And you need to roll up your sleeves. You need to get dirty in this stuff and figure it out so that you can have the best possible ideas as you start to put the pen to paper on your blueprints to define the future. Folks, this was another amazing conversation. Zach and Tomas, thank you very much. All of you out there, I hope you can appreciate the insights and value that these two bring to the conversation. Don't forget to like, comment, and share so that everybody else can find Proc-N-Roll, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Thibault.
Thanks, Conrad.
Thank you.